Eyes. Eyes in a portrait are very important. It's eyes that make the portrait alive, and whether they are big or small, they still need to have life in them. So it's no good just to say, well, he's going to have blue eyes and pick up some ultramarine blue and slap some blue in. Because if you look at a real eye, there are all sorts of layers of light and colour in an eye. So we paint them in layers. Well, I do anyway. So on the clown, this is actually the Western clown. He doesn't have a name yet. I've already got a layer of yellow, which is my new gamboge, and I've also got a layer of the purple. So the colours that I'm using in this painting are my dioxine violet, ultramarine blue, new gamboge and alizarin. Basically the process for painting the eyes is the same in all the clowns. It just varies upon colour and maybe placement. I have also already put in the masking fluid for my highlights. I'm not worrying about the pupil at this stage. I'm just trying to get the colour in because the pupil will be darker than the colour. I think initially I was thinking that maybe he would have blue eyes. However, he's going for brownish hair, so he's going to have brown eyes. So already we have 2 layers on, and I'm about to put a 3rd on. So I'm going to go in, I'm just thinking, because I want all the colours, and brown is made up of all 3 colours basically. I'm going in with a bit more of my ultramarine blue, but I'm not covering the whole eye with it. I'm just covering the top part. So if you notice, I've got some hard and soft edges. So I'm going to put it right up against the eyelid because I want it darker against the eyelid, and I want more light shining through against the bottom eyelid. Right, so he's got a hard edge at the moment, and I'm going to just soften that edge with the very, very tip of my paintbrush. Right, so that eye is now quite nice and damp, both of them, and you should always do both your eyes at the same time, because if you do one and then go away and have a coffee and come back and do it the other one, you will never get them the same. Your paint will have changed, everything. Even if you say, well, I've mixed the paint, some of that paint would have evaporated. Okay, so I'm putting in now onto that dampness a little bit of my darker colour, and in this case it is my my violet-y purpley colour, and I'm dropping it in along that top edge. And if you can see, I'm using a very, very tiny brush because the eyes to me are important. They make or break the portrait. And I'm putting it in along the top edge on the hard or the dry edge, and it's bleeding down. Now you can see how that one has bled further down and this one hasn't, so I'm going to have to just coax it because I don't really want a hard edge there. Right, so happy with that. It doesn't have to come the same distance down, especially in this case because his eyes are squonk. Yeah, I like what's going on there. So I'm going to leave that, and I'm going to allow it to dry before I carry on, because I am a little bit scared that if I put too much in too soon, it might just start covering the whole thing. So I'm going to play safe. Now I've just done what I normally do and gone back in when I normally say stop, and the minute I say stop I go back in and carry on, which is what I've just done. And I sort of do that because I think I'm going to stop, and then I rejudge the wetness of the paper and I think, well, hang on, I could potentially carry on, because it's always better to do something wet and wet unless you are purposefully going to be doing it in layers. And I'm using glazes or layers, but I'm also purposefully going wet and wet. So I'm doing all sorts of techniques. Right, I'm happy with that. I am going to leave it, and I am going to allow it to dry this time. Right, so I've dried the eyes with a hairdryer. It's always best to leave them to settle for a bit, which I did before I dried them. And I'm now going to wet those eyes with water. So I'm just putting a bit of water over the whole thing. On my tile, I have mixed up a dark brown, and because of the colours I'm using, I've used the violet, I've used the new gamboge because it gives really a nice colour brown, and I've put in a touch of ultramarine blue. So all the colours that I'm using, and I still wanted to go a little bit darker, so I'm just touching that into that wetness. And I'm going to go back with a tiny brush, and I want those fingers, because it's those fingers that give you all those little fine lines that we get when we think of the iris. Okay, so I'm just coaxing some of that. I still haven't painted the pupil. Now, because he's got very, very dark eyes, I will have to paint a pupil, but it will not be as prominent. Right, I've decided I'm just going to put a little bit of the new gamboge along the bottom. Now, I haven't got my bottom eyelids in yet because I haven't finished my eyes. So normally I would not finish my eyes to this degree until my painting was much further on. But because I'm doing this for the video, I am taking them further than I would. Right, so what have I just done? I fiddled with my colours that I dropped in, and then I have dropped in a teeny weeny spot of water, clean water, in each eye. And again, I'm going to allow that to settle. So at the moment, his eyes are like really popping at me. Once I've done all the detail around his eyes, which I'm not going to do a lot of detail, but once I've done that, I may well have to go and do more to his eyes. But for now, I'm fairly happy. Now I've dried those eyes again, and I've mixed up that really, really dark colour, which was my violet, my yellow, and a bit of my ultramarine blue, and I'm going to put in some of the pupil. Now please remember that normally I would not be doing these eyes to this degree of finishedness until I had done a lot more work on the face. I'm doing this purely for this benefit of this video, and so that you can see the stages. Right, so I don't want his pupils to be too big, but I've added them in. and I'm fairly happy with that. So I'm going to give it a dry. So I've given it a dry, and right, so you can immediately see that the whites or the highlights of his eyes are really standing out. Now again, I cannot finish, and I'm not going to finish it at the moment, because there's some work that needs to be done on his eyes, and I can't judge that whiteness until I adjust the colour on the top of his eyes, because there's lots of wrinkles and things. So this is the sort of thing that I would probably be doing while I'm waiting for the iris to dry. You see, immediately by putting more colour onto the eyelids, those eyes have gone into his head. I'm using a square brush, and I'm using the square brush for a reason, and that is because I'm able to get some really nice marks with the square brush, some nice fine marks. I'm not using too much paint. I can use the corner to break up, and I'm just using all the colors that are on my tile. So when I start painting in all the lines on his face, you saw that I just made a mark with, had a bit of brown on my tile. I didn't complete it, I just went left a gap, and I am doing the underside of all the marks that I've got. So in other words, when I put colour on, and I've got all the colour is sort of on my tile already, so I don't have to mix all the time, I am concentrating on putting it at the bottom of the wrinkle, as it were, and then I'm just softening down, but not allowing it to run all the way to the wrinkle below. So I've got a bit of the skin showing, and if I wanted to, I can now take my smaller brush, and on the top of that wrinkle line I can go in and very, very gently, only in some places, I don't want to do it everywhere. You can see how that top was wet. I don't want it to look like a star. So I'm painting, what I'm doing is I'm painting the layer between the wrinkles at the same time as I'm painting the wrinkle. You've got to look very carefully at these wrinkles, because some of them we're painting the shadows, and sometimes those shadows seem to go above the wrinkle and not below, but by and large I think most of these go below. Now I'm also sometimes painting with water, so if I just wanted to be really soft, and I'm also painting with colour, so sometimes I'll pick up water and sometimes I'll pick up paint. It just depends what I want at a specific time, and I am very, very much keeping my eye on the image, but I don't want to put in each and every one. And I'm also not going to finish one section. I'm dancing around. So you saw how I painted that wrinkle. It's more or less dry, so I can, I've just got the round brush in my hand now. I'll put another one in. So I'm painting the actual wrinkle. haven't got enough pigment in my brush, it's a bit wet. Okay, and the wrinkles are not straight. If you look at an old person's skin, they are traversed with all sorts of other lines. And I'm going to bring that round there and give him a bit of a saggy eye, only because it just looked like the paint was telling me that's what it wanted to do. So I thought, right, okay, right, happy-ish with that. And I can't leave it too white in between, but at the same time I don't want to lose that wrinkle, so I've got to be very careful about the wetness of the wash that I'm actually building that up with. That's still damp, so I'm just going to put a teeny weeny spot in there, which should actually do it. Okay, so both eyes are, well, they're not really the same at the moment, but they've both got a bit more colour in them. I'm going to go back to his mouth, I think, because I don't want to overwork that. So I'm going to leave all that to just settle and dry. Same technique where I'm just dancing around. And I'm going to go back to this area here, where I have already put in a bit of red, but it's not red. So I need to readjust. I'm going to go back to this mix with my, and again, this one's quite difficult because the shadow actually goes in both directions. So let's just do that. Okay. So if we look, that shadow goes that way and that way. So I'm putting it in and softening edges, and it goes all the way up really to this, which is, I've drawn it in quite dark. I probably didn't need to. Well, what happened is I should have taken some of those lines out with my blue tack, and I didn't. Important thing about doing portraits is keeping your lights. So don't lose your lights, and it's quite light here, and it's this lightness, if you look at the picture, it's that lightness against that darkness that makes that bulge in his mouth, as it were. Right, so I really need that to dry before I can go too much further. Right, I'm going to try and very quickly finish off the eye on the right hand side and see where we go. I've been fiddling around for those who are observant, waiting for things to dry, fiddling, just doing bits, little bits, dancing around. Some of it's very wet and I should maybe have dried it. Right, so notice that I'm not painting the whole eyelid, because the eyelid has already got paint on it, so it's already got a layer of paint on it. I'm just wetting the section that's going to go a little bit darker. Okay, so I'm looking at that. I've also got clean colour on my tile, so I don't have to pre-mix too much because it's already here. Right, so I've given that some time to dry off, and I'm just painting this top bit into damp paper. It's got to go above the eyelid as well, because the eyelid's quite difficult. It sort of changes. Right, and I'm going to just bring a bit of that pinky colour into it so that it bleeds, and it's going to be a lot darker, but I don't want to lose that light bit there, so it'll have to just hold fire for now. I think what I'm trying also to point out is that at no time do I just paint with one colour. All the time I'm picking up different colours from my tile all the time, and sometimes I'm drawing, sometimes I'm filling in shapes. When I'm waiting for something to dry and I don't want to dry it with a dryer because that kills the action of the paint, I'll go and just do a little fiddle somewhere like what I'm doing now. So it's just, I'll probably do a glaze over that, but I'm quite happy with what's happening there. Right. I don't want the eyes to become too dominant. So in other words, I'm not trying to paint every little nook and cranny. But if you look at the photo, it's dark on that side, but it gets darker on so it changes. So it's darker on the eyelid, and then over here it becomes darker on the skin side. And I'm also having to be careful that I don't make everything too brown. So that was a reason that I just didn't go in straight away and do it, is because I was waiting for that to dry off a little bit. And because it's a recess, so it goes into his nose, I can't put too much red into it because it would stand out too much. So I have put a little bit of red in, but I've then gone and counteracted it with a bit of blue. I'm not covering up that whole shape. I'm leaving some of my lights, and yeah, it becomes quite light in there, so I'll leave the light. We need to exaggerate the lights. And he's got a shadow. His eyelid creates a shadow. So I'm going to use a bit of the purple and the blue and actually take that right over that highlight and paint the shadow in. So now suddenly, hopefully, we now have a more rounded looking eyeball, and we also have lost the white of our highlight. That needs to dry, and then I'm going to put in that dark line that marks the shadow of the bottom of the eyelid. So let's just see if I can. No, I'm going to have to dry it. I'm going to have to dry it, so I will quickly do that. Right. I'm not sure if this is going to be too dark. And then I'll take a bit of the purple again and go back in because the whites of the eye are not white. Certainly mine never are. And then he's also got this section that needs a teeny bit of colour in it. Let it bleed into that corner. Right, I'm going to go back to my square brush because this has dried off a little bit too much. So just going to put a bit more purpley pink in it, I think. It's probably not dry enough. When you're glazing, it's always good to make sure it's properly dry. Yeah, it's better. Don't want a hard edge, so. And I will put a teeny weeny bit of blue in there, just to make it not so red. And I'll bring it down. Right, so for now, that is the process of the eye. I'm not going to do any more on his eye at the moment, because I need to build up this side. That's the lightest part of his face. There, that's light. So I'm just trying to keep my lights light. And then I need to have a good look at his face, at his mouth actually. Okay, so the colours that I was using in this one were Cerulean, Prussian, Alizarin and New Gamboge. And if I remember correctly, just for the video, this is Salt Morning, I did say you could choose your own colours. So to get going, I need to just get going. So I'm looking for an easy peasy part to get going with. Normally I would go with the nose, but I think there's a video of that already. So I'm going to start getting some of my flesh color on here. And you're going to say, well, how are you going to get that flesh color? Okay, so that is a mix of my alizarin and my New Gamboge. And at the moment, it is very orange. So the problem is that I've got cerulean and Prussian, which are going to make it green. So I need to add a bit more red to it. Then I'm going to add lots and lots of water. Then I'm going to add a pinprick, literally a pinprick of Prussian. Okay, so immediately it's changing color. Notice that I'm only mixing on one side of that puddle, but that's not too bad. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that as a mix. I can't suddenly deviate from my colors because I've suddenly thought, oh, I've chosen my colors, but now I've got to get some sort of a skin tone going. So you've got to think about that kind of thing before you start. I'm even going to take that over his nose a bit because I'm still just thinking big shapes. Right. And what I'm trying to do is just make the white of his face, of around his eyes, stand out. And this is probably not going to be the finished layer. I was reading an article lately, and a portrait had about 70 glazes on it before he was happy. So us doing 3 or 4 is easy work. I'm not painting the shadow in yet because underneath the shadow is the skin. The reason that I'm using the square brush is because I'm able easily to control the amount of paint that I'm putting onto this glaze. Now, if we look at that shape, it's sort of got a softish edge. So I don't want too much of a hard edge there, and I do want a little bit of that glaze to come into that chin shape. Right, and then that's too light, so I need to block some of that in. And then I'm just going to very quickly, because I'm going to concentrate on his face for the next couple of minutes. Right, so I'll just soften all that. Right, so smaller brush, nice fine point, same colors. I need to mix a little bit more. So that's far too yellow again. So I've just added a bit of red, a bit of Prussian into there. Right, I'm happy-ish with that color because I want to paint that in. While it's wet, while this side of his face is wet. Which is why I've chosen now a round brush so I can be a bit more detailed. So immediately by darkening that, I'm making this side of his face, or the whiteness, become whiter. And that's going to happen the same thing there as well. And I just don't want any hard edges. He's got a shadow, but I'm not worrying about the shadow at the moment. Oh, I've gone over the white bit, not concentrating. And I'm just going to soften for now. Okay, so let's have a look at his eyes. I'm seeing that his face has been painted, okay, with like white face paint. I don't know if you agree. You're allowed to talk while the video is on. It makes it more interesting. So I'm going to change my color mix, and I'm going to start this time with my Prussian because I wanted to go more of a gray because I'm painting the shadows. So I've got sort of a reddy purple, and then I'm going to add a pinprick of my yellow. So in my eyes, because everybody sees differently, that's a little bit green. So it is literally a pinprick of red. Yeah, I'm fairly happy with that. I'll test it on my scrap paper. And for the benefit of the video, he doesn't really have very many crinkles and sprinkles, so I'm going to create some. Now, we can use a square brush. At the moment, I'm using a round. So most of the time when we paint a wrinkle, it's the underside that we soften. I'll be careful where I put my hand. I'm going to exaggerate and make him a lot more crinkly than maybe he is. So it makes him a bit more interesting. And this is where I'm starting to change the picture for my own gain. Okay, so I'm softening. And then I'm going to put in a teeny weeny bit more pigment, so a tiny bit darker, not too much more. I don't want it red, so I need to have a bit more blue in there. Just where I think that the crease might be deeper. Okay. And I can do the same thing here because that makes it look more natural. He's got a very, very pale crinkly bit in here, so I can't have too much grey on here because remember he's got white paint on his face. So whether we're painting a skinned face or a painted face, the only difference is because he's got a painted face, I am using the grey on top of basically white because I don't want to lose all the light colour. Let's get his eyebrow in now. His eyebrow is going to be sort of the same color as his hair. And I think I decided his hair was going to be orange. I did. So, but then that's painted. That's going to be dyed. So he's going to have brown hair. So, brown. Okay, so to make brown, I've already got the color of his skin. And I'm going to just add a bit more Prussian to one side of that. And a bit more red. Yeah. And touch of that. Touch of that. Right. Sort of brown. Okay. I've still got all the colors on my plate. So I can dip into his skin color. I can dip into the color for the wrinkles. And I can dip into the color for his eyebrows. And I am very, very quickly just side of the brush going to, I want him to have quite nice thick eyebrows. I'll do one at a time. However, when you're painting eyes and eyebrows, always do them both at the same time, because you'll never get them the same otherwise. So I need a bit more strength to my brown. So I've just added exactly the same colors to that puddle. I've now got a darker, richer brown on one end, and I'm just going to, for now, drop in some of those shadows. That there is too light at the moment, but that's fine for now. Okay, we need to remember that we're doing this in glazes. Quite like that eyebrow. And yeah, okay, so take some of that eyebrow color, and he's got very, very bushy eyebrows, so I'm going to bring that over there. All I'm doing is I'm playing. He hasn't actually got a name yet. Has anybody got a name for their clown?
Joey.
Joey.
Keir Starmer.
Now that would be a good one. However, we can't be too political. We might be thrown into jail. Right, so that sort of needs to dry. But I'm going to go back to this colour and do the other side. Just look where the tip of my brush is. And I don't want that to go all the way up. Remember, I need that whiteness to stay, because that's what is making him look painted. And I'm actually going to give him some, just for the purposes of the demonstration, I'm going to give him some, make him more of a worried clown, because actually he's a bit of a grumpy clown really.
I called him a sad clown, yeah. Call him hapless then.
And so I'll just,
But he's got a
and hapless. And I'm just softening the under edge. Might actually let that go into the tip of my brush. Okay. Might even bring some of that down, because we have got things that link. I don't want them all to go all the way across. And he's going to have a shadow across his head here, so I will put them in, because they will be underneath the shadow. Okay. So I'm starting to get some character. Now I do need, he's going to have blue eyes, I have decided. So I'm going to start the first wash on the eyes, because I need to, because he's not going to look at me until I've got that in. However, because it is a very pale wash, okay, very, very pale, the whites of our eyes are not white. They're either pink or pinkish like mine, or blue, but they're definitely not white.
with road maps if you're tired.
Yeah. Now, if you watch the video, which I hope you will, I have a perfect eye picture on there. Well, I haven't yet, because I haven't published it yet, but I have one, so look out for it.
Put masking fluid there on the...
I've only got
there,
a
just a
teeny
little
weeny
teeny
bit
bit.
of masking fluid. Right, so that's his eye, and I'm going to leave it. I need to dry a little bit of this before I can carry on.
Are you going to do shadow at the top under the hat
Yes,
as
but
well?
I'll do that last.
Right, okay.
One of the last things is I'll do that shadow. I want to get some of the shadow in. It's probably a little bit early, but let's get it in on his eyelid. Now, his eyelid, again, is not white. It's got shadow in it. So I've painted that colour in. Taking it into his eyebrow. Bring it down on there a bit. Remembering that this is, I'm reading it as paint. Might not be, but I'm reading it as paint. So I've worked from big to small. Go away. The other thing you can do is if you've got really fine wrinkles, you can take your stick, and while that's wet, you can scratch very gently and you can pull some of them down. So if you have a look close up, you can actually see how I've pulled those fine wrinkles that you couldn't paint into his skin. Right, so let's have a look at your eye, mate. It's got to go much darker in that corner, so I'm going to put a bit more blue in there. I'm going to have to zap it. Notice that although I would probably really like to have got my teeny weeny brush out, I haven't. I have resisted. I'm still just painting shapes. I'm not painting an eye, I'm painting shapes. And all the time I'm changing. I haven't got a lot of paint on my towel. All the time I'm just playing around with the same colors. Too green, make it more red, add a bit of the blue, all the time. And I'm looking for hard edges, for soft edges, depending on what I want. If I want it to bleed, I look for soft edges. If I want something defined, I look for hard edges. Right, he has got... Okay, now at the moment that looks far too outlined. So I'm just softening a little bit of that edge. Now, at this point, I'm going to put a little bit more blue in his eye, because I want that top eyelid and the eye to be one. But if that blue melts into that darker bit, for now it doesn't matter because I can lift it out. I just want, right, happy-ish with that. I'm going to put a bit more blue in there, and then I'm going to move away because I need to dry that, and I also need to do that side, which I'm not going to do for the video. It's got to go a lot darker up here, so I need to dry it.